There was a time in football when fear had a face, when players didn't just compete, they survived. It was the mid-1970s, an age of broken helmets, blood on jerseys, and men who played not for fame, but for pride. Every Sunday, crowds filled the stands to witness chaos wrapped in shoulder pads, and somewhere in the middle of that storm stood a man who didn't smile, didn't talk much, and didn't need to. His stare was enough to freeze a huddle. He wasn't built like a modern linebacker. He was lean, sharp, and moved like a wolf in human form. His hits weren't tackles, they were messages. Quarterbacks feared him before the ball was even snapped, and when he spoke, even veterans listened. He didn't care about popularity or headlines. He cared about one thing: domination. For opposing offences, he was a nightmare they couldn't wake up from. The kind of player who made you think twice before crossing the middle of the field. And that man was Jack Lambert, the most intimidating linebacker of 1976, and the heart that made the steel curtain breathe fire. Long before the crowds in Pittsburgh learned to chant his name, there was a quiet kid from small-town Ohio who played the game differently. He wasn't built to impress scouts, too skinny, too raw, and far too intense for a college locker room that wasn't ready for him. But from the very beginning, something about him stood out. He wasn't fast because of drills or training. He was fast because he hated losing. At Kent State, his fire didn't come from fame, it came from fury. Every snap looked like a personal vendetta, every tackle like a test of will. Coaches said he played like a man chasing ghosts. Teammates said they'd never seen eyes that focused. He wasn't the loudest voice on the field, but he was always the loudest in impact. And by the time his college career ended, one thing was clear: this was no ordinary linebacker. Yet when the 1974 NFL draft arrived, few teams looked his way. Too small, they said, too thin, too unpredictable. But one man in Pittsburgh saw what others didn't: Chuck Noll. The Steelers were already building something powerful, a defense that would go down in history as the Steel Curtain. And Noll believed this strange, sharp-edged kid from Kent State could be the missing piece. When Lambert walked into the Steelers camp, he didn't look like a linebacker. He looked like a man on a mission. The veterans laughed at his wiry frame until the first scrimmage. That day, he hit a running back so hard that even the offensive line stopped and stared. The field went quiet, and someone whispered, "He's different." From that moment, he didn't need to prove anything else. He wasn't just a rookie. He was a storm in a number 58 jersey. By mid-season, he'd earned not just respect, but fear. Offensive coordinators started circling his name on playbooks like a red warning sign. And by the time the Steelers lifted their first Lombardi trophy, fans across America had learned the truth. Jack Lambert wasn't just another draft pick. He was destiny in shoulder pads. By the mid-1970s, the NFL was no longer a game of just skill. It was a test of survival. And at the center of that battlefield stood one man whose name alone could change the way an offense played. Jack Lambert had transformed from a wiry rookie into the heartbeat of the Steel Curtain, the enforcer who gave Pittsburgh's defense its soul. When he stepped onto the field, something shifted in the air. Even the crowd seemed to grow quieter, waiting for that one hit that would send chills through the stadium. Lambert didn't just tackle, he attacked. Every collision sounded like a car crash echoing through the bleachers. His hits weren't about violence, they were about message. He played with a cold, calculated rage that made opponents second-guess every route. Quarterbacks admitted later they would scan the field not just for open receivers, but for number 58 lurking in the shadows. He didn't have the massive frame of a typical linebacker, but his timing, precision, and instincts made him deadly. It was as if he could see the future, anticipating plays before they unfolded. 1976 was the year the league truly began to fear him. That season, Lambert was everywhere, stuffing runs, crushing blockers, and taunting offences with silent intimidation. The image of him standing over fallen players, missing teeth glinting under the lights, became the face of 1970s football. He was chaos in motion, a symbol of toughness that even his opponents respected. Running backs talked about avoiding the middle because Lambert lived there. Wide receivers said catching a pass near him felt like walking into a storm you knew you wouldn't survive. And yet, behind that ferocity was an unmatched discipline. Lambert never played for stats. He played for statement. Every game was personal. Every hit a reminder that football wasn't meant for the faint of heart. The Steelers fed off his energy, their defense growing meaner, faster, and prouder with every snap. In those years, Pittsburgh didn't just win, they conquered. And at the heart of it all, with fire in his eyes and mud on his teeth, was Jack Lambert, the man who made fear fashionable in football. By the late 1970s, the Pittsburgh Steelers were more than a football team. They were a brotherhood built on blood, bruises, and belief. In the middle of that brotherhood stood Jack Lambert, the man who gave chaos its order. He wasn't the captain by title, but when he spoke, men listened. In a locker room full of legends, Mean Joe Green, Jack Ham, Mel Blount, Lambert was the emotional anchor, the voice that reminded everyone what it meant to wear black and gold. He didn't give speeches filled with fancy words. His message was always simple. You hit first, you hit harder, and you don't ever back down. Every Sunday felt like war. The rivalries were brutal. The Raiders, the Cowboys, the Oilers. Each game a clash of egos and endurance. When the Steelers faced the Raiders, the league called it football's version of trench warfare. Bodies flew, helmets cracked, and in the middle of that carnage, Lambert was always the calmest man on the field. He played angry, but never out of control. That balance made him terrifying. He'd stare down opponents after a hit, not to taunt, but to mark them. He wanted them to remember his eyes when they got up. His teammates adored him for the same reason opponents feared him. Lambert protected his defense like a brother protects family. If someone cheap-shotted a Steeler, Lambert was the first to respond. You mess with one, you mess with all, he'd growl. And everyone believed it. He wasn't built for cameras or interviews. He was built for moments. Mud on his jersey, blood on his lip, and that fearless posture. It was everything Pittsburgh stood for. Off the field, he was quiet, almost shy, a man who disappeared into small-town life the moment the game ended. But inside that stadium, under those bright lights, he became something else. A symbol of what football used to be, raw, honest, and mercilessly real. To his brothers in black and gold, Jack Lambert wasn't just a teammate, he was the pulse of their fight, the man who turned brotherhood into legend. When the 1980s arrived, football was changing. The helmets got shinier, the rules got softer, and the game that once smelled of sweat and steel began to turn into a show. But for those who lived through the 1970s, one image still defined what real football looked like. A tall, toothless man standing in the mud, shoulders hunched, eyes locked, waiting for the next snap. Jack Lambert wasn't built for the modern NFL. He was the last of a dying breed, a warrior who treated every down like a F-inal stand, one eye's locked, waiting for the next snap. Jack Lambert wasn't built for the modern NFL. He was the last of a dying breed, a warrior who treated every down like a F-inal stand. As his body began to wear down, Lambert refused to slow. He played through pain, broken bones, and bruises that would have benched anyone else. For him, pain wasn't a problem. It was proof that he was still alive in the fight. But the hits took their toll. By 1984, injuries had begun to silence the roar that had once defined him. When he finally walked off the field for the last time, there were no grand speeches, no media tours, just a man, sweat-soaked and silent, leaving behind a chapter of football that may never be written again. Fans didn't need a farewell. They already knew. The moment he stepped away, it felt like something sacred in football had ended. Across Pittsburgh, people hung his number 58 jersey in garages and bars, next to family photos and old game tickets. Because, for that generation, Lambert wasn't just a player. He was a memory, a heartbeat frozen in time. They remembered the hits, the growls, the cold November nights when he'd stand in the snow with no sleeves, daring the world to test his toughness. He didn't just represent the Steelers, he was the Steelers. The grit, the fearlessness, the pride. Even today, when young linebackers talk about learning the game, coaches show them Lambert's film. They don't show the stats, they show the attitude, the way he read a play, the way he moved before the snap, the way he knew what was coming. His legacy isn't in numbers, it's in impact. He turned intimidation into art. He gave defense a face, and that face still haunts offensive coordinators when they talk about the golden era of football. Ask anyone who watched him live, and you'll hear the same tone, a mix of awe and disbelief. They don't make them like that anymore, they say, shaking their heads with a half smile. Because deep down, every fan from that time knows something the new generation doesn't. Football once had warriors, not entertainers. And Jack Lambert was one of the last true warriors the game ever saw. Years later, when he was inducted into the Hall of Fame, he stood on that stage with his usual quiet posture. No fancy words, no dramatic pauses, just honesty. If I could start my life over, he said, I'd do it all again. And I'd be a linebacker every time. That single line summed up his entire career. Simple, fearless, and unforgettable. Jack Lambert didn't just play in an era of legends, he defined it. And every time someone says steel curtain, every time a young player dreams of being fearless, his shadow rises again. A reminder that real greatness doesn't fade, it echoes. If you remember those days, the hits, the rivalries, the roar of the crowd, then you've just relived a piece of football history. This was Jack Lambert, the heart of the steel curtain, the man who made fear famous. If this story brought back your memories of the golden era, hit that like button, share it with someone who still remembers real football, and subscribe to NFL Legends for more stories that keep the spirit of the game alive. Because legends never really retire.